The storm was a monster roaring in the darkness, but the sound that froze the man's blood wasn't thunder. It was 3 knocks at his door, so faint they sounded like the heartbeat of a ghost. When he opened it, he didn't find a neighbor seeking shelter, but a small boy, drenched and shivering, with eyes that held a terror older than the storm itself. The man let him in without asking a single question, offering a towel and the warmth of his home. But the boy hadn't brought only the rain and the cold with him. He carried a secret, and he was about to reveal it with a single question. What could a child ask that would shatter a stranger's life and force him to become his only hope? The scent of freshly sanded cedar and pine was the soul of Daniel Brooks's home. It was the perfume of honest work, a fragrance that clung to his clothes, and that his 7-year-old daughter Emily said she could taste in the air. For Daniel, a carpenter with strong hands and a noble heart, that scent represented the simple, steady life he had built for the two of them on the outskirts of a sleepy town where time was measured by the tolling of the church bells. His life followed a predictable rhythm, the buzz of the saw in the morning, the warmth of tortillas on the griddle at noon, and Emily's laughter in the afternoon, his only and most cherished possession since life had entrusted her to him completely. But that night the world outside was chaos. A late summer storm had descended with relentless fury, dumping sheets of water that slammed against the tin roof with the force of 1,000 drums. Lightning tore through the dark veil of the sky, briefly revealing the black silhouette of the ridge, followed by thunder that shook the foundation of the little house. Inside, however, a warm calm reigned. Daniel had just secured the tarps in his workshop to protect the wood. Emily, in her bunny pajamas, was finishing a glass of warm cinnamon milk sitting at the oak table her father had built with his own hands. "Daddy, do bunnies get scared?" her small voice asked, a fragile note in the symphony of the storm. Daniel knelt beside her. "No, sweetheart. They know they're safe in their burrow just like we are here." Daniel reassured her with a smile that always chased away her fears. He tucked her into bed under a clean patchwork quilt and kissed her on the forehead. He was a man of simple joys, and that was the greatest of them all. Back in the living room, a blinding flash of lightning lit up the space, and with the next thunderclap, the power went out. The house was plunged into deep darkness, broken only by the faint glow of dying embers in the fireplace. Daniel lit a candle, casting flickering shadows on the walls. It was in that expectant silence that he heard it. A knock, faint, almost inaudible. Tap, tap, tap. He thought it was the wind, maybe a loose branch. But the sound came again, more insistent this time. He moved toward the door, a chill running through him that had nothing to do with the cold. Who could possibly be outside on a night like this? "Who is it?" he asked, his voice louder than he intended. Only the howl of the wind answered him. Just as he was about to convince himself he'd imagined it, the sound came again, this time a desperate scratching. His instincts told him not to open the door, but his compassion, a stronger force, made him turn the lock. He opened the door just a crack, and what he saw chilled him to the bone. Standing on the porch, drenched by the rain, was a little boy. He couldn't have been more than 8 years old, small, thin, and soaked to the skin. Water streamed down his face, plastering his dark hair to his forehead. He wore only a thin t-shirt clinging tightly to his tiny frame. But it wasn't his pitiful condition that struck Daniel, it was his eyes. They were enormous, dark, and held a fear so deep and ancient it didn't seem to belong to a child. Without thinking, Daniel threw the door wide open. "For God's sake, come in now!" He gently guided the boy inside, closing the door behind them to shut out the storm's fury. The child was trembling uncontrollably, a puddle forming at his feet on the wooden floor. Daniel rushed to grab a large towel and wrapped it around him, rubbing his arms and back. The boy stayed stiff like a frightened little animal. "Dad, what's going on?" Emily's voice came from the hallway. When she saw the stranger, she froze. "Go back to bed, honey. Everything's okay," Daniel said, though he didn't quite believe it himself. But Emily, with the pure logic of a child, went to her room and returned with her favorite stuffed bunny. She offered it to the boy. "He's called Mr. Hops," Emily whispered. "He protects you from thunder." That simple act of kindness seemed to create a tiny crack in the boy's armor of fear. His small fingers slowly closed around the stuffed animal. Daniel felt a knot rise in his throat. He tried asking the boy his name, where he came from, but the child remained silent, his gaze lost on the floor. Daniel made him a cup of hot chocolate, thick and sweet, and gently placed it into his hands. The warmth seemed to anchor him, if only slightly, to the present moment. Several minutes passed in heavy silence, thick with unspoken questions, while the storm roared outside. Daniel knew the right thing to do was to call the police. That was the logical, responsible thing. But something in the boy's terrified eyes told him this wasn't just a case of a lost child. This was a child running from something. Handing him over to the authorities might mean sending him straight back to the source of that fear. Finally, just as Daniel was beginning to lose hope of getting any answer, the boy raised his head. His lips trembled, struggling to form words. He looked directly into Daniel's eyes, and in that gaze, the carpenter saw an abyss of pain that shook him to his core. The boy gathered all the strength left in his small body and asked the question that would shatter Daniel's peace and change his life forever. "Mister," he whispered, his voice broken by a choked sob, "can you save my mom?" The words, heavy with an unbearable weight, hit Daniel like a hurricane. His eyes burned, and for the first time in years, the strong man, the foundation of his small family, broke down and cried in silence. Daniel's tears were a silent answer to the question that had torn him apart inside. But in the face of the boy's pleading eyes, the carpenter's pain transformed into a surge of purpose. He wiped his cheeks roughly with the back of his hand and knelt down, placing his large, steady hands on the boy's small shoulders, a gesture to ground him in the safety of that moment. "I'll do everything I can, champ," Daniel said, his voice a hoarse whisper but filled with unshakable conviction. "I promise you." A small part of the tension seemed to leave Aiden's body. It wasn't a dramatic change, but his shoulders relaxed just a tiny bit. It was enough. Daniel led him to the bathroom and opened a trunk where he kept some of Emily's old clothes that no longer fit her. He found a flannel pajama set with the space rocket print that, while a little short, was warm and dry. While the boy changed into it, Daniel prepared a makeshift bed on the living room couch, fluffing the pillows and spreading out a thick quilt, creating a small nest against the world. Aiden, swallowed up by the rocket pajamas, curled up on the couch and fell asleep almost instantly, slipping into a heavy, dreamless sleep born of complete exhaustion. Emily, who had watched everything unfold with an unusual solemnity, placed her stuffed rabbit, Mr. Hops, next to the boy's head. "So the rockets won't feel lonely," she whispered to her dad. Daniel carried her to bed and then returned to the living room. He couldn't sleep. He sank into his old leather armchair, the one that knew the shape of his body, and sat there watching over the boy's sleep. Outside, the storm had quieted its fury, fading into a steady drizzle. Inside, the house was deeply silent, but Daniel's mind was a whirlwind. What had he gotten himself into? Making a promise to a terrified child was one thing, but reality was another. He was a man alone. He had a daughter to protect. Every paternal instinct told him to steer clear of danger, not invite it into his home. Common sense said he should take the boy to the police at first light. That was the logical thing to do, the responsible thing. But then the image of Aiden's eyes came back to him, eyes filled with a terror so raw, so ancient, it defied logic. They were the eyes of someone who knew there was no safe place left in the world. He looked down at his hands, calloused and worn from years of working with wood. These were hands that knew how to build, to fix, to shape. Could these hands protect a life? Could they mend an injustice so deep he didn't know the answer? But as he watched the boy's chest rise and fall beneath the quilt, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. He couldn't break the first promise he had made. He had to try. For that night, and for the morning yet to come, that child was his responsibility. Dawn came with a pale, clean light, revealing a world washed by the rain. The scent of damp earth drifted through the open windows. Daniel, who had barely slept, was already in the kitchen brewing a pot of cinnamon-spiced coffee. The warm scent of cinnamon and brown sugar filled the house with the sense of quiet normalcy. Aiden jolted awake, sitting up quickly on the couch, disoriented. Daniel walked over calmly. "Good morning," he said in a low voice. "I made breakfast. You must be hungry." At the kitchen table, breakfast became an exercise in fragile trust. Daniel served the kids Mexican-style scrambled eggs with warm tortillas. Emily, having regained her usual cheerfulness, filled the silence with a stream of innocent questions. "Do you like red? Can you draw a dog? Rockets are faster than cars, right?" Aiden ate quietly, responding to Emily with short one-word answers. Yes or no, without lifting his eyes from his plate. Every bite he took seemed to require silent permission. He volunteered nothing about himself, his mother, or why he had run away. He was like a small lockbox filled with fear and secrets. Daniel understood that any direct question would only drive him back into his shell. Trust, like fine wood, couldn't be forced. It had to be worked gently and with patience. After breakfast, they stepped out into the small backyard. While Daniel pretended to check on some flower pots, Emily managed to get Aiden to play with her, making little dirt paths for the ants. For a brief moment, Daniel saw a normal child absorbed in a simple childhood game and felt a sharp flicker of hope. That was when the danger revealed itself. A car. A sleek black SUV with windows so dark they seemed to swallow. The light turned the corner and slowly crept down their unpaved street. It was completely out of place in their modest neighborhood, like a shark gliding through a pond full of goldfish. Aiden's reaction was instant and terrifying. He froze. The twig he had been playing with slipped from his fingers. His face turned pale, waxy. A violent tremble overtook his body, and with a muffled whimper, he bolted behind Daniel's legs, clinging to his jeans with desperate force. The black SUV rolled slowly past the house like a predator sizing up its prey. Daniel could feel the invisible gaze of its occupants bearing down on them. His protective instinct, which had been smoldering quietly, suddenly burst into flames. He wrapped his arms tightly around Aiden, feeling the boy's frantic heartbeat pounding against his leg. The SUV eventually moved on and disappeared, but the ominous weight of its presence lingered in the air. There was no longer any doubt. Aiden's fear wasn't imagined. The threat was real. It had 4 wheels and had just staked its claim. In that moment, Daniel's resolve hardened like steel. Going to the police was out of the question. The man in the black SUV would undoubtedly present himself as a concerned father, and Aiden would be handed right back into the nightmare he had escaped from. He knelt in front of the trembling boy, who still had his face pressed against his leg. "Aiden," he said in a firm but gentle voice, "listen to me." The boy looked up. His eyes were deep wells of panic. I'm not going to let them find you. I won't let anyone hurt you." He paused, making sure the boy understood the weight of his words. "For now, this has to be our secret. Do you understand? A secret between you, me, and Emily." Aiden didn't speak, but through his tears he nodded slowly. Just once. It was a pact, a silent vow sealed in a backyard under the morning sun. The refuge was fragile, the trust barely a sprout, but the alliance had been forged. Daniel the carpenter had become the guardian of a dangerous secret, and his quiet life was over forever. The days following the black SUV's appearance were marked by a new and tense normal. Daniel's house, once a place of freedom and laughter, had turned into a sanctuary with unspoken rules. They no longer played in the front yard. The front door remained locked even during the day. Daniel explained to Emily with a seriousness she understood without needing details that they were playing a new game called the silence game, where they had to stay quiet and not talk to strangers. Aiden didn't need any explanation. For him, vigilance and silence weren't a game. They were the language of survival, one he already knew too well. Meanwhile, the man in the black SUV, the architect of Aiden's fear, decided that silent intimidation wasn't enough. He needed to control the narrative. So he stepped down from his polished fortress and walked among the people of the town. He showed up at the small sheriff's station on a Tuesday morning. He didn't arrive like a thug, but with the calculated, calm confidence of a man used to the world bending to his will. His name was Trevor Collins. He was tall, dressed in a light linen suit that probably cost more than Officer Dawson's monthly salary, and he spoke with the polished eloquence of a lawyer or politician. With a look of deep, well-rehearsed concern, he shared his story with the officer. He pulled a photograph from his wallet. It wasn't a casual snapshot, but a professional studio portrait. In it, a smiling Aiden, his hair neatly combed, had his arms around a beautiful woman with gentle eyes, his mother Maria. They looked like the perfect family, the very image of happiness. "This is my stepson Aiden," Trevor explained, his voice laced with convincing sadness. "He's a child, with a vivid imagination, officer. Sometimes he has trouble telling fantasy from reality. We had a small disagreement, just something silly like kids do, and he ran away from home a couple of nights ago." He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. "My wife, his mother, has very fragile health. This situation has pushed her to the brink. We just want him home safe and sound." Officer Eric Dawson, a practical man used to dealing with neighborhood disputes, and the occasional drunk, found himself caught in a dilemma. On one side, he had a vague report from Daniel about a frightened child. On the other, he had this well-dressed, articulate man holding a photo that seemed to contradict any tale of abuse, a narrative that painted the boy as troubled and anyone who might be sheltering him as a possible kidnapper. Trevor's story was simpler, cleaner. And in police work, simple usually won. "I understand, Mr. Collins," Dawson said, his tone already swayed. "We'll treat this as a case of a runaway minor. We'll keep an eye out. If anyone sees him, we'll let you know right away." Trevor nodded in appreciation and gave a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. He had planted the first and most important seed. The law, or at least its local representative, was now seeing the world through his eyes. But he didn't stop there. His next stop was Pine Hollow Cafe, the social heart of the town. He sat at a table, ordered the most expensive coffee, and struck up a conversation with the owner, Mrs. Elvira. He showed her the same photo, told the same moving story. He left a generous tip so large it became the talk of the day. Gossip, the bloodstream of the town's communication, kicked into full gear. By noon, the tale of the poor man from the city with the troubled stepson was already public knowledge. Daniel felt the shift in the air when he had to drive into town for nails to complete a rushed order. He'd left the kids with strict instructions not to open the door and to hide in the workshop if needed. The short drive in his pickup felt different. The few people who greeted him did so with a new distance in their eyes. He could feel the weight of being the keeper of a secret the outside world had already judged. He entered the Golden Hammer hardware store, a place that had always felt familiar but suddenly seemed foreign. As Robert, the owner, told him a joke about a politician, Daniel overheard two customers whispering behind him. "They say the boy's really rebellious. What a burden for that family." Daniel clenched his jaw, feeling the invisible trap tightening around him. That was when the bell above the shop door rang. He turned instinctively, and his blood turned to ice. It was him. Trevor Collins had entered the store. Their eyes met across a shelf of tools. It lasted no more than 3 seconds. But in that brief moment, a silent battle was fought. Daniel saw in Trevor's eyes a calculating coldness, a void that his public smile couldn't conceal. He saw a predator. Trevor, for his part, saw nothing more than a simple carpenter, his work clothes dusted with sawdust. His first glance was one of pure disdain, the kind a man gives when he doesn't even register the presence of someone he considers beneath him. But then something in the intensity of Daniel's stare made him pause. A flicker of curiosity, maybe suspicion, crossed his face before he returned to his usual mask of indifference. Heart-pounding, Daniel paid for his nails and stumbled out of the store. The enemy was no longer just a shadow in a car. He had a face now, and that face had seen him. He returned home with a knot of dread in his stomach. The ominous feeling was confirmed the moment he stepped inside. The house was too quiet. "Emily, Aiden," he called out, his voice tight. He ran to the workshop and found them hiding behind a stack of wooden boards holding onto each other. Emily was crying silently. "Daddy," she whispered, pointing toward the front door. "A man came. He knocked really, really hard. He said he was looking for a boy." The floor seemed to vanish beneath Daniel's feet. He pulled them both into his arms, his mind racing at 1,000 miles an hour. It wasn't just that their lie had spread through town. Now they knew exactly where they were. The shadow hadn't just stretched to cover the town, it had crept right up to his doorstep, dark and threatening. He was trapped, and the wolf had caught their scent. It knew exactly where to find them. The sound of Victor's knuckles pounding on his front door echoed in Daniel's mind long after the silence had returned. It was the sound of his last refuge being breached, the confirmation that there was no safe place left. That night, as he watched the two children sleep, Emily in her bed and Aiden curled up on the couch, still tense, even in his dreams, Daniel felt like a man stranded on an island that was shrinking with every tide. The town believed the lie, the law believed the lie, and the wolf knew exactly where the sheep lived. Loneliness was a physical weight pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. He knew he couldn't go on like this. Fighting alone was a slow suicide. He needed an ally, but trust was a currency he couldn't afford to spend in the wrong place. His mind went over the faces in town, crossing them off one by one. Too gullible, too fearful, too indifferent. And then a face formed in his mind, tied to the smell of fresh baked bread and a kind of wisdom you couldn't find in books. Helen Carter. It was a monumental risk. Getting her involved would mean putting her in danger. But the memory of his kids hiding in the workshop, trembling in the dark, gave him a courage born of desperation. He had no other choice. The next morning, before the sun had risen and the town began its routine, Daniel woke Aiden. "Come on, champ," he said quietly. "We're going to visit a friend. It's important that you come with me." They walked through the silent streets damp with dew. The crisp morning air clashed with the tight knot of anxiety in Daniel's stomach. Aiden stayed close to him, his small hand clutching a fold of Daniel's pants. Daniel knew the boy was the key. His own story, that of a frightened carpenter, could be dismissed. But the child's presence, the sheer terror in his eyes, was a truth that couldn't be ignored so easily. The Bread and Hearth Bakery was a warm beacon of light in the dimness of dawn. When they stepped inside, the familiar aroma of yeast, cinnamon, and sugar wrapped around them like a blanket. Helen was already there, her flour-dusted hands moving with the graceful rhythm of a lifetime dedicated to her craft. She looked up and her smile faded as soon as she saw the worry carved into Daniel's face and the small figure hiding behind him. "Sweetheart," she said, her voice filled with immediate concern. "What's weighing on your soul at this hour?" "Miss Helen, I need help," Daniel said, his voice frayed with desperation. "Can we talk, Ella?" No hizo preguntas. Se secó las manos en su delantal y los guió a la pequeña trastienda, el santuario de sacos de harina y libros de cuentas. Cerró la puerta aislándolos del mundo. Se sentó y esperó, sus ojos oscuros y sabios fijos en él. Alejandro se lo contó todo. La historia salió a borbotones, desordenada y febril. La tormenta, la promesa, el coche negro, la actuación de Víctor en la comandancia, los susurros del pueblo, los golpes en su puerta. Mientras hablaba, Esperanza no lo miraba solo a él. Su atención se centraba principalmente en Santiago, que se había pegado a la silla de Alejandro como si fuera un salvavidas. Cuando Alejandro terminó exhausto y con la garganta seca, un denso silencio llenó la habitación. Esperanza no dijo nada durante un largo minuto. Luego, ignorando a Alejandro por completo, se dirigió al niño. Su voz cuando habló era increíblemente suave. «Ay, mi niño, tienes cara de que no has comido un buen pan dulce en días», dijo con una ternura que desarmaría un ejército. Salió de la habitación y regresó con una concha de azúcar todavía tibia del horno. Se arrodilló lentamente frente a Santiago, un gesto que la ponía a su altura, que eliminaba cualquier barrera de autoridad. «Ten, esta es para ti». Santiago miró la concha, luego miró a Alejandro buscando permiso en sus ojos. Alejandro asintió levemente. Solo entonces el niño extendió su mano temblorosa y tomó el pan. Le dio un mordisco y luego otro, comiendo con una prisa ansiosa, como si temiera que se lo quitaran. Esperanza no necesitaba más. En ese simple acto lo vio todo. Vio el miedo que condicionaba hasta la aceptación de un regalo. Vio la dependencia absoluta en Alejandro para sentirse seguro. Vio la tristeza profunda en unos ojos que deberían estar llenos de travesuras infantiles. Se puso de pie y se volvió hacia Alejandro. Había una nueva luz en su mirada, una de furia y acero. «El dinero habla muy alto, Alejandro», dijo. Su voz era firme y clara, «y las mentiras bien vestidas son las más fáciles de creer. Pero la verdad siempre susurra en los ojos de un niño, y este niño no susurra, está gritando, te creo». El alivio que sintió Alejandro fue tan inmenso que casi se dobla. Una sola frase, te creo, había levantado un peso que lo estaba aplastando. Por primera vez en días no estaba solo. «Pero escúchame bien, mijo», continuó ella, transformándose de confidente a general. «Ese hombre Víctor es una serpiente. No podemos atacarlo de frente. Ya envenenó el pozo. Si lo acusas, te acusará a ti. Tenemos que ser más astutos. Tenemos que darle al pueblo una razón para dudar». At that very moment, as if fate itself were listening, the bakery bell rang. "Ms. Helen, save me a dozen rolls," shouted the voice of Mrs. Carmen from the fabric store. Helen Carter winked at Daniel. "Stay here and watch." She stepped out to the front counter, her face once again wearing the warm, familiar mask of a friendly baker. "Carmen, of course. Did you hear the commotion last night on the Carpenter's Street? They say Mr. Collins came looking for his stepson." "Yes, can you believe it?" Carmen replied. "Poor man having to deal with such a difficult child." Helen sighed, leaning over the counter as if about to share a state secret. "Yes, a real tragedy," she said softly. "But between you and me, something just doesn't add up. A man that powerful knocking on doors in the middle of the night like a thug. And that look in his eyes, I saw him the other day, eyes like ice. Carmen. I don't know, he gives me a bad feeling. But well, who am I to judge?" She handed the bag of bread to Carmen, who stood quietly for a moment processing the new information. The seed of doubt planted by the most respected woman in town had begun to take root. When Daniel walked out of the bakery with Aiden, the sun was already higher in the sky, and the world felt just a little less hostile. As they crossed the square, one of his neighbors, the same one who had eyed him with suspicion the day before, gave him a brief, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Trevor's shadow hadn't vanished, but a small candle had been lit against it, and the hands now shielding that flame from the wind were the steadiest and wisest in all of Pine Hollow. He was no longer alone in the dark. All right, now that the first seed of doubt has been planted in the community, the story is ready for a turning point. The safety Aiden feels thanks to Daniel and Helen will allow him to open a locked door in his memory, revealing the one piece of physical evidence that could change everything. The alliance with Helen had been like a balm for Daniel's soul. He no longer walked through Pine Hollow with his head down, but with a new calm determination. The change in him was subtle, but Aiden, with the sharp instinct of a little creature who had known danger, sensed it. The atmosphere in the small house grew lighter, and with it, the invisible chains that had bound the boy's spirit began to loosen. He started talking more, short phrases at first, which gradually turned into questions about Daniel's work or comments on Emily's drawings. One day, while Daniel was sanding down a wooden board in the workshop, he heard a laugh, a real spontaneous laugh, because Emily had made a funny face. Daniel stopped what he was doing, closed his eyes, and simply listened, imprinting the sound into his memory. It was the sound of healing. He realized that in order for Aiden to reveal the truth about his past, he first had to feel the safety of the present. The revelation came one afternoon in the most unexpected way. Daniel was working on a special order, a jewelry box made from walnut wood. It was a delicate piece with fine joints and a space in the lid for a small inlay. Aiden was sitting on a stool, quietly watching how Daniel's hands moved, with a blend of strength and precision, turning a block of wood into something beautiful. Daniel had just finished polishing the box and held it up to admire the grain's shine. "It came out nice, don't you think?" he said to the boy. Aiden climbed down from the stool and walked over. He touched the smooth, silky surface of the box with the tip of his fingers. "Yes, it's pretty," he whispered. Then he fell silent, his gaze lost in the wood. A memory stirred by the object was struggling to surface. "My mom," he began, his voice barely audible. "She has a box too, her secret box." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. He set the jewelry box down on the workbench with infinite care and knelt beside the boy so as not to intimidate him with his height. "A secret box?" he asked gently. "Do you want to tell me about it?" Aiden nodded slowly, his eyes filling with a sadness Daniel already knew too well. "It was our secret, no one else's." And then the words began to flow in fragments like pieces of a broken memory the boy was trying to put back together. Mom was sad. All the time. Trevor said she was sick. He gave her some special vitamins. He made air quotes with his tiny fingers. But those vitamins made her sleep a lot. Sometimes her eyes were empty. He paused and swallowed hard. One day he yelled at her really loud. After he left, Mom took me out to the garden. She was crying but without making any noise. Do you know how Daniel, when the tears just fall by themselves? Daniel nodded, feeling a lump in his throat. We went all the way to the back where the big oak tree is, the oldest one, the one with the thick roots coming out of the ground. She said, Aiden, sweetheart, I need you to be really brave and promise me something. This is our most important secret. Santiago's voice broke as he mimicked his mother's. She pulled the box out from under a pile of leaves. It was made of dark wood, and it smelled like the flowers my grandma used to bring to church. She said, Inside here is my voice, my heart. If I ever get really sick, if I fall asleep for too long and don't wake up, this box has to speak for me. Do you promise, my love? Aiden was now crying openly, but he didn't stop. He needed to tell the story. I promised her. She kissed the box. Then she moved a big rock that's next to the roots and dug with her hands. She hid it there and covered it with dirt and leaves. She said it was the safest place in the whole world. Daniel wrapped his arms around him, rocking him gently while the boy cried on his shoulder. The horror of the story blended with a surge of electric hope. Maria's voice, the proof. It was no longer a child's word against that of a powerful man. It was physical evidence hidden and waiting. That night, as soon as the kids were asleep, Daniel ran to the bakery. It was closed, but a light was shining through the back room window. He knocked on the rear door. Helen opened it, and her face turned serious the moment she saw the urgency in Daniel's eyes. She wasn't alone. Robert, the hardware store owner, was sitting at the table with a cup of coffee. It looked like the bakery had become the headquarters of their little revolution. What happened, son? Helen asked. Daniel, breathless, told them the story of the box. He repeated Maria's words, described in detail the exact spot where it was hidden. When he finished, the air in the small room seemed to vibrate with a new energy. Vague hope had turned into a concrete goal. Evidence! Robert grunted, his deep voice rumbling like distant thunder. That's exactly what it is. Evidence. With something like that, not even all that bastard's money can save him. But getting to it, said Helen thoughtfully. That house is a fortress, and after my visit they'll be more alert than ever. We have to do it, insisted Daniel. It's the only chance we've got to really save her. The three of them looked at each other, united by a dangerous purpose. They were no longer just a carpenter, a baker, and a hardware store owner. They were a team, a conspiracy born out of decency and necessity. All right, said Helen, taking command, but not recklessly. We need a plan. First, we have to know when they're not home. We need to track their movements. I'll handle that. My customers are better than any newspaper. And I'll get whatever we need to get in and out without being seen, added Robert. Ropes, hooks, whatever it takes. They both turned their eyes to Daniel. His role was the most dangerous, but also the clearest. He would be the one who had to walk into the lion's den. He left the bakery that night feeling the ground under his feet a little more solid. The fear was still there, cold and heavy in his gut. But now it was accompanied by something else, a plan. They had a goal, a mission, to rescue Maria's voice from the grip of the earth that held it. Helen's bakery became the quiet command center of their operation. Over the next few days, every customer who came in looking for fresh bread unknowingly became a source of information. With the skill of an expert weaver, Helen pieced together threads from casual conversations, gossip, and passing observations to form a detailed tapestry of life inside the Collins estate. Mr. Trevor left for the capital really early, mentioned the wife of the gas delivery man as she counted her change. He leaves every Wednesday like a bat out of hell. They say he has really important meetings. But the brother never moves from that place, added another customer. My nephew does yard work for the house next door, and he says that man Ivan is always on watch with that grumpy face of his, gives off a bad vibe. The crucial piece of information came on Saturday. Trevor left every Wednesday at 8 in the morning and didn't return until nightfall. That was their window. A narrow window of opportunity guarded by a watchdog. That night in the back room of the bakery, their little war council mapped out their risky plan. The main objective wasn't to recover the box yet. It was still too soon, too dangerous. The mission was reconnaissance. They had to see with their own eyes whether the garden matched Aiden's description. And if luck was on their side, maybe they could assess Maria's real condition too. I'll go, Helen said, her decision unwavering. The plan was a masterpiece of small-town cunning. She would bake the most spectacular tres leches cake she had ever made, an offering so generous that refusing it would be an insult. Her excuse would be Christian kindness, a simple act of charity for the poor sick lady the whole town had been whispering about. It's a Trojan horse made of flour and sugar, Robert explained with a crooked smile. No one suspects a grandma with a cake. Roles were assigned with the seriousness of a military operation. Robert would be the lookout. He'd park his old truck on a hill overlooking the street entrance, pretending to be broken down. A red handkerchief tied to the mirror would be the signal that Trevor had returned unexpectedly. Daniel's role was the most torturous to wait. He had to stay home, keep Aiden occupied and calm, fighting the urge to run straight into danger himself. He was the anchor, and his patience was essential for everyone's safety. Wednesday morning arrived bright, the air thick with tension you could cut with a knife. Daniel played cards with the kids, his laughter hollow in his own ears. Every minute felt like an hour. At 8:10 the phone rang. It was Robert. "The lion's out of the cage," his deep voice said. "The path is clear." Moments later, Helen, dressed in her Sunday skirt and a clean shawl, walked steadily toward the tall iron gate of the Collins estate. She carried a large wicker basket covered with an embroidered cloth. As she rang the intercom bell, her heart pounded like a blacksmith's hammer. "Who is it?" barked a suspicious, rough voice through the speaker. "Ivan." "Good morning, young man," Helen replied, her voice sweet as honey. "This is Helen from the bakery. The whole town is so worried about Mrs. Maria, and I wanted to bring her a little something to brighten her day." There was a long silence. Helen held her breath. She could feel Ivan's suspicion through the iron gate, but social appearance prevailed. Turning away a gift from Miss Helen would have become the town's gossip of the week. "Leave the basket on the ground and step away," the voice ordered. "Oh, come on now, young man. It's far too heavy to set down like that," Helen insisted gently. "Besides, I'd like to hand it over in person and offer my prayers. I won't take but a moment." With a buzz of annoyance, the electric lock gave way. The heavy gate opened. Ivan stood waiting at the main door. He was a large man with a hostile gaze he didn't bother to hide. Inside, the house was cold and impersonal, a museum of expensive furniture where no one seemed to actually live. While Helen began her speech about the cake, a faint, almost musical voice floated down from the top of the stairs. "Ivan, who is it?" Maria appeared at the landing. She looked like a ghost. She was wrapped in an elegant silk robe, but her skin was pale and nearly translucent. Her movements were slow and unsteady. Her eyes, though still beautiful, were clouded by a fog of confusion. Yet when she saw Helen, a spark of recognition lit within her, a glimmer of the woman she used to be. She began to descend the stairs, gripping the handrail for support. "I just wanted," she began. Ivan moved with feline speed, stepping in front of her. "Maria, go back to your room." His tone was low, but it vibrated with restrained menace. The doctor was very clear. "You need rest." To make his point, he took her by the arm. It looked like a casual gesture, but Helen noticed the way his knuckles turned white from the pressure. She saw the brief wince of pain on Maria's face, a flicker that couldn't be mistaken. She saw raw fear flood her eyes. And in that very moment, as Ivan held her, Helen's eyes shifted past him through the glass doors that opened onto the garden. And there it was, a majestic old oak tree, its twisted trunk and gnarled roots clinging to the earth. It was real. Aiden's story was real. The mission was complete. Time for a strategic retreat. "Well, we didn't mean to intrude," Helen said, extending the basket toward Ivan and forcing him to let go of Maria to take it. "Ma'am, I hope you recover very soon. The whole town is praying for you," she added, placing deliberate emphasis on the whole town, hoping the message that Maria was not alone would reach her. She gave Maria one last look of encouragement, then turned and left the house with the same quiet dignity she had walked in with. It wasn't until they were safely back inside Robert's truck that Esperanza's hands began to tremble. They drove straight to Daniel's workshop. The moment they stepped inside, the look on Helen's face said it all. She told them everything she had seen, the condition Maria was in, the emptiness in her eyes, the cruelty in Ivan's grip. But most importantly, she confirmed the tree. "They've drugged her, Daniel. They're turning her into a rag doll," she said, her voice laced with icy fury. "And the jacaranda is exactly where Aiden said it would be." The news was both a victory and a sentence. They had confirmed everything they needed to know, but the cost was steep. "My visit put them on high alert," Helen concluded grimly. "Ivan never took his eyes off me. Now they're suspicious. We've lost any chance of getting back in with an excuse. Next time someone shows up at that house, they won't be so polite." Silence settled in, thick with the smell of wood and the weight of reality. They had walked into the lion's den and come out with vital information, but in doing so, they had awakened the beast. The race to recover Maria's box had just become far more dangerous. Back in the bakery's storeroom, Helen's report landed like a verdict. The image of Maria, fragile, trapped a puppet in the hands of her jailers, along with the confirmation of the tree, lit a fire of urgency in Daniel's chest. There was no time for caution. Patience had become a luxury they could no longer afford. It might cost Maria her life. "We can't wait until next Wednesday," Daniel said, his voice echoing with a conviction forged deep within him. "They know you were there, Helen. If they haven't moved the box already, they will. It has to be tonight." Robert and Helen exchanged a glance. The original plan, careful and methodical, had become useless. They were in a race against time. "Tonight, then?" Robert agreed, his expression hardening with resolve. "But we're going to need more than luck. We'll need a miracle, or at least a distraction big enough to pull the two wolves out of their cave and keep them busy." The idea, bold and purely local, came from Helen. "The St. Isidore Festival is just around the corner," she said, a spark of cleverness in her eyes. "The band rehearsals have already started playing at night. This town is used to noise." Her smile turned mischievous. "My nephew Jason and his band, the Valley Cardinals, owe this old baker a huge favor, and if there's one thing they know how to do, it's make noise." The plan was woven together with threads of desperation and community genius. Helen would tell her nephew she wanted to organize a surprise rehearsal for the festival procession. She'd ask him to gather his band and start playing at full volume right in front of the Collins estate, pretending they got the street wrong. It would be festive chaos, a cacophony of trumpets, accordion, and drums that no one could ignore. To make it more convincing, Helen would spread the word among a few trusted neighbors, telling them to bring out chairs and bottles of tequila, turning the mistake into an impromptu block party. Robert would handle the logistics and gear, a rope ladder, gloves, and a flashlight with a simple code. One flash meant all clear. 2 flashes meant danger. He would be the eyes on the hill, and Daniel would be the hands in the dark. The night fell moonless like a silent accomplice. Before leaving, Daniel stepped into his daughter's room. Emily and Aidan were both asleep, their breathing calm and steady. He kissed each of them on the forehead, a silent blessing and promise. His love for them was the fuel that pushed back his fear. At 10:30, a distant sound broke the silence of the night, the cry of an accordion. Then a trumpet blasted a sharp and cheerful note. The party had begun. Dressed in dark clothes, Daniel met Robert at the lookout point. "The music did it," Robert whispered. "They're on the porch yelling at the band. It's your moment. Be careful, son." A single flash of light blinked in the distance. All clear. Crouching low, Daniel moved like a shadow through the alleys until he reached the back wall of the estate. He threw the hook. The sound of metal hitting stone rang loud to his ears, but it was swallowed up by the rowdy polka music. He made sure the hook was secure and began to climb. Every movement was deliberate, every grip a test of strength and nerve. He jumped down into the garden. The contrast was surreal. Up front, a chaotic celebration. Back here, a sepulchral silence broken only by the echo of the music and the pounding of his own heart. He oriented himself by the silhouette of the old oak tree, a dark giant etched against the sky. When he reached the tree, he dropped to his knees. His hands, more accustomed to the touch of wood, now dug into the cold, damp earth. He fumbled for the loose stone Aidan had described. He found it, moved it aside. He began to dig with feverish urgency, dirt packing under his fingernails. Time stretched and compressed. Every second was an eternity, and then his fingers brushed wood. With a care that contradicted his rush, he unearthed a small rectangular box. It was wet and caked with mud, but it felt solid, real. It was Maria's voice. He tucked it into his jacket, the cold touch of the wood against his chest grounding him to reality. At that very instant, the music stopped. The sudden silence was more alarming than the noise. A shout of pure rage, Trevor's voice sliced through the air. "Get out of here or I'll call the police." A light turned on in one of the upstairs windows facing the garden. Daniel dropped flat to the ground. A powerful flashlight beam swept across the yard, missing him by inches. He didn't wait. He ran for the wall. He heard the sound of a back door slamming open. He climbed the rope with the strength of pure adrenaline, his muscles screaming in protest. He leapt over the wall just as the flashlight beam hit the base of the oak. He had escaped by a hair. He didn't look back. He ran and ran until he reached the rendezvous point with Robert. Together, they vanished into the safety of the night. Minutes later, in the back room of the bakery, the 3 conspirators gathered. They were out of breath, covered in sweat and dirt, but victorious. Daniel pulled the box from his jacket and placed it in the center of the table. There it was, the object of all their hopes and fears. They had recovered it. They had entered the wolf's den and stolen its darkest secret. They stared at the box, knowing its contents held the power to free a woman and condemn 2 men. The race was over. But the war, the real war, was just about to begin. The back room of the bakery had become an improvised courtroom, lit by a single light bulb hanging over the table. The air was thick with a kind of sacred anticipation. With hands trembling slightly, not from fear but from reverence, Daniel Brooks used the tip of a pocket knife to pry open the simple wooden lock on the box. The lid creaked softly as it opened, releasing a faint scent of old wood and dried flowers. Inside, Maria's voice had been waiting. The first thing they found was a bundle of letters tied with a faded blue ribbon. They were addressed to her sister. Daniel read a passage aloud, and his voice filled with quiet emotion. "Each day is a thicker fog, Rachel." Trevor smiles at me, but his eyes are as cold as stone. The medicine he forces me to take steals my thoughts, drains my strength. Sometimes I look at Aiden and feel like I'm seeing him through glass. I'm so afraid of disappearing completely. Beneath the letters were documents that told a colder, more brutal story. Prescriptions for powerful sedatives signed by a doctor from the capital. A copy of a notarized power of attorney giving Trevor full control over Maria's finances with a trembling signature that looked like a scream for help. And at the bottom, a small fabric-covered journal. Helen Carter picked it up gently and opened it. They read random entries, each one like a knife to the heart. March 10th. Today, Aiden brought me a flower from the garden. I hid it under my pillow so Trevor wouldn't see it. It's my only treasure. May 2nd. I've started writing this, hiding it. If he erases me completely, I want someone to know I was here, that I loved my son more than my own life. June 15th. The idea for the box. It's my last resort, my message in a bottle. If someone reads this, please save my boy. Tell him his mom fought for him until the very end. A heavy, furious silence fell over the room. There was no doubt left. They had irrefutable proof of calculated, methodical cruelty. Their mission was no longer just about rescue, it was a demand for justice. Meanwhile, at the Collins estate, dawn had brought with it discovery and fury. It was Ivan Ortega who found the disturbed soil next to the old oak tree during a nervous patrol of the garden after the chaos of the night before. The empty hole was a silent accusation. When Trevor saw it, his legendary self-control cracked. For a moment, his perfectly sculpted features twisted with pure violent rage. He didn't scream. His fury was colder, more dangerous. He connected the dots with terrifying speed, the meddling old baker, the defiant carpenter, the absurd serenade. It had been a coordinated operation. They had humiliated him. They had beaten him on his own turf. They know, Trevor hissed, his voice like ice. They know everything. He realized that any attempt to maintain his facade was now useless. The narrative had slipped from his hands. His only option left was brute force, erase the pieces from the board. Start the car, he ordered Ivan. We're going to take back what's ours. We're going for the boy. That afternoon, the air on Daniel Brooks's street was calm. Life went on as usual. Inside the workshop, the trio of conspirators were discussing the best way to present the evidence to the authorities, maybe through a lawyer from out of town. But it was already too late. The black SUV appeared at the end of the street, not with stealth, but with the speed of a missile. It screeched to a halt in front of the house, kicking up dust and panic. Trevor and Ivan got out. Their faces were masks of relentless determination. The games were over. Ivan, a human battering ram, threw himself against the workshop door, his shoulders slamming into the wood until it shook. Trevor headed for this front door. "Aiden!" he shouted, his voice a thunderclap that chilled the blood of neighbors peeking from their windows. Daniel stepped out of the house, planting himself between them and his family. "Get out of here!" he yelled, standing his ground legs braced, ready for the fight of his life. "Step aside, carpenter," Trevor threatened, stepping closer. "This has nothing to do with you. Give me the boy and we'll leave you in peace." "Never," Daniel shouted back. The confrontation drew people in. Doors opened. Faces appeared at windows. Robert Whitaker and Helen Carter, just coming out of the workshop, joined the scene. "Leave this man alone," Robert bellowed, his baritone voice echoing down the street. "Everyone in this town knows what kind of man you are, Mr. Collins. A coward who preys on women and children." Helen stood beside Daniel, her small stature doing nothing to diminish the immense strength she projected. "You're not alone, Daniel," she declared, her voice steady and clear, directed not just at Daniel but to the entire community watching. That was the spark, the whispers, the doubts, the quiet outrage. Everything solidified into a massive, silent act of solidarity. Men stepped out of their homes. Women came down from their porches. They carried no weapons, just their presence. They stood in the street side by side, forming a semicircle, a human wall blocking Trevor and Ivan's path. There were no shouts, no threats from the townspeople. Just a collective silence, a wall of accusing eyes and resolute bodies. Trevor and Ivan stopped. They looked around bewildered. They were used to people stepping aside, to fear clearing their path. But here, fear had transformed into unity. They were trapped not by force, but by the power of common decency. Trevor's mask of control finally shattered. Frustration and helpless rage twisted his face into a grimace of pure hatred. He was defeated, and he knew it. And in that heavy silence, a new sound began to cut through the air, faint at first but approaching fast, a sound unmistakable and to many in that moment divine. The siren of a police cruiser. Officer Eric Dawson, driven by a dozen frantic calls from alarmed neighbors, was finally on his way. The public standoff had reached its peak. Justice, summoned by the voice of an entire town, was on its way. The wail of the police siren sliced through the tense air, and the patrol car screeched to a halt, bringing the silent standoff to an end. Officer Eric Dawson stepped out of the vehicle. His face no longer showed the uncertainty of previous days. Instead, it carried the impassive, resolute mask of the law. With a single look, he understood the scene, the two cornered men, the wall of people protecting the carpenter's house. The power had shifted. Trevor, in a final pathetic act of desperation, tried to play the only card he had left. "Officer, thank God you're here," he exclaimed, trying to inject panic into his voice. "This man has my stepson. He's kidnapped him. You have to arrest him." Dawson didn't even look at him. His eyes met Daniel's. In a solemn gesture, Daniel stepped forward. He didn't raise his voice. He simply lifted the wooden box, the humble chest that held an undeniable truth. "Here is the proof of everything, officer," he said, his voice clear and steady. The voice of Maria Collins, the woman this man tried to silence. He handed the box to Dawson. It was a symbolic act, the justice of the people handed over to the justice of the law. The officer opened the lid right there in front of everyone. A quick look at the letters, the medical prescriptions, the dated journal entries was enough. The pattern of abuse was as clear as day. His face hardened, becoming a mask of cold professional fury. Then he turned to Trevor. "Trevor Collins," he said, each word striking like a hammer. "You are under arrest for unlawful imprisonment, abuse, fraud, and any other charges that result from the investigation." He turned to the two officers who had arrived in the second patrol car. "Cuff him." The metallic click of the handcuffs locking around Trevor's wrists echoed down the quiet street. It was the sound of justice, final and irrevocable. Trevor's face twisted, his mask of superiority shattering to reveal the raw features of hatred and disbelief. Ivan the thug gave up without a fight. His bravado had vanished, leaving only a confused and defeated man. As they were placed in the patrol car, a collective sigh passed through the crowd. The nightmare was over. But one task still remained, the most important of all. "Helen, please come with me," Dawson requested. Along with another officer, he entered the house that had once been a gilded prison. The luxury inside now felt obscene and hollow. The silence hung heavy, soaked with years of sorrow and fear. They climbed the stairs and found the master bedroom door slightly ajar. Maria was curled up in a corner, trembling from the sound of sirens and shouting. When she saw the uniforms, terror overtook her features. To her, a uniform meant Trevor's power, not protection. Helen stepped forward, moving with the calm of a mother approaching a frightened child. She knelt at a respectful distance. "Maria, sweetheart, it's me, Helen," she said in a voice soft as velvet. "It's over now. The fear is gone. We've come to help you, to take you somewhere safe." Maria looked at her, her clouded eyes struggling to focus to process what she was hearing. She saw the kindness in Helen's face, the respectful posture of the officers, and in that moment, a tiny crack opened in the fog of her mind, a possibility as strange and terrifying as freedom itself. They helped her down the stairs and out onto the porch. The sunlight made her blink as if waking from a long sleep. And then the miracle happened. A child's voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. "Mom." Aiden had slipped free from Robert's hand and was running toward the house, his little legs moving with desperate speed. He came to a sudden stop at the base of the porch stairs, his chest heaving, staring at the pale, fragile figure that was his mother. "Mom," he said again, this time in a whisper full of longing and doubt. That word, that voice was the key that unlocked the final door in Maria's mind. The fog lifted completely. The fear vanished. Only one instinct remained, one truth, the most powerful one in the universe. "Santi," she breathed, her own voice cracked from emotion and disuse. Forgetting her weakness, she stumbled down the steps and dropped to her knees on the grass, her arms spread wide. Aiden ran to her. The impact of their bodies was the sound of two halves of the same heart coming back together. He buried his face in her shoulder, his little arms clinging to her neck like he would never let go again. She held him with the strength she didn't know she had, her face buried in his hair, rocking him back and forth. And she cried. She cried with deep, wrenching sobs that weren't of sorrow, but of absolute release. She cried for the lost days, for the fear she had endured, and for the overwhelming joy of feeling her son safe in her arms. From a distance, Daniel watched the scene with Emily squeezing his hand. Tears ran freely down his face, but they were tears of a promise fulfilled. He saw the result of his vow, the reason for his fight. He saw a mother and son reborn in an embrace. An ambulance, which Officer Dawson had called, arrived quietly. As the paramedics helped Maria to her feet with Aiden still clinging to her like a shadow, Maria's eyes searched the crowd. Her eyes met Daniel's. No words were spoken, none were needed. In the silence of that look, she gave him a galaxy of gratitude. And he saw in her not just the woman he had helped rescue, but the promise of a strength and beauty ready to bloom again. The ambulance drove off, carrying them to the hospital to safety, to the first day of their new life. The battle was over. Justice had been served. The liberation was complete. 6 months later, the air in Pine Hollow smelled of rich soil and marigolds. Autumn had arrived, painting the slopes of the hills in ochres and gold. The story of that night, the confrontation, had woven itself into the fabric of local memory, a modern legend whispered in the town square, a reminder that the strength of ordinary people when united is more powerful than any stone wall or bank account. Justice, often seen as something distant and abstract, had in this case become a force both real and unrelenting. Maria Collins' wooden box with its devastating contents had become an irrefutable piece of evidence. Trevor Collins, confronted with its truth and the testimonies of over a dozen neighbors, was sentenced to a long prison term in a maximum security facility far away where money couldn't buy even a ray of sunlight. His loyal enforcer, Ivan Ortega, received a similar sentence for his complicity. The chapter of the Collins estate had closed for good. Maria chose not to run from her ghosts. In a quiet act of courage, she sold the oppressive estate and with the money bought a smaller, light-filled house on the same street as Daniel Brooks. The house had a large backyard, which she took it upon herself to bring back to life. She spent her mornings with her hands in the dirt planting dahlias, bougainvilleas, and a small lemon tree, pulling up the weeds of her past and sowing the seeds of her future. The pale, absent woman was gone, replaced by someone whose gentle smile lit up her face and whose laughter was now often heard from Helen Carter's bakery. Aidan Clark was her brightest reflection. The boy who once clung to Daniel's leg now ran through the streets playing soccer with the other neighborhood kids. His friendship with Emily Brooks had blossomed into a true sibling bond full of games, shared secrets, and the occasional friendly squabble. The shadows in his eyes had been replaced by the carefree light of a childhood reclaimed. The relationship between Daniel and Maria grew naturally, slowly, like two trees whose roots had quietly intertwined beneath the surface. It wasn't a fevered passion, but a deeper connection built on gratitude, respect, and the shared understanding of people who had both known loss and loneliness. He helped her repair the roof of her new home. She brought him dinner at the workshop on the nights he worked late. They would sit on the porch beneath the starry sky and talk. He told her about the wife he still missed. She told him about the young artist she used to be before Trevor drained the color from her world. They were healing together, and their conversations became a balm for old wounds. Without even realizing it, the four of them had become a family not bound by blood but by choice, struggle, and love. In the afternoons, the kitchen table at Daniel's house filled with the sound of four people sharing their day. Schoolwork blended with the smell of coffee and sweet bread. They had become a home. To celebrate the town's patron saint festival, Daniel hosted a backyard barbecue. It was a celebration of life and community. Helen and Robert, the generals of their little war, held the seats of honor. Jason and the Valley Cardinals played in the corner, their music now a joyful soundtrack of peace. The neighbors who had formed the human wall were there too, sharing tacos and cold beer. At one point, Robert raised his bottle. "I want to make a toast," he said in his booming voice, bringing the conversations to a halt. "To the neighbors who don't look away. To the good folks who know that the only border that matters is the one between right and wrong. To us, cheers." Cheers answered a chorus of voices, a sound of pure solidarity that rippled through the air. Later, as the setting sun painted the sky in deep orange and the guests had gone, the four of them stayed in the now quiet garden. They walked over to the lemon tree they had planted together when Maria moved in. It already had small green shoots. Aidan touched one of the new leaves. "This is a happy tree," he said with the certainty only a child could have. Maria ruffled his hair. She looked at Daniel, and in her eyes there was a universe of peace. "Yes, sweetheart," she replied. "Here we're all happy." Daniel wrapped his arm around Maria's shoulders, a gesture that had become natural familiar. They stood there together, watching Emily and Aidan try to catch a firefly that had just begun to glow in the dusk. It was a perfect moment in its simplicity. A moment that was worth every second of the fight, every tear, every night of fear. Looking at the family life had given him at this unexpected love that had arrived on his doorstep in the middle of a storm. Daniel felt a gratitude so deep it filled his chest. The carpenter, the man who fixed broken things, had found his own repair. His house was no longer just a refuge. It was at last a complete home.